This story is about Enkrid, a talentless man who dreams of becoming a knight. Even after endless training, he was only able to become a squad leader in the Empire military. A war is taking place, and he is fighting desperately. He is trying to survive as much as possible while swinging his sword. While trying to run away from the incoming arrows, he was attacked from the front. A sword pierced his chest, and he died. His spirit is moving towards the afterlife. But he got stuck in a realm between life and death. When he opened his eyes, he was back to the same day he died. Initially, he thought of the past events as a dream, but everything that he experienced was the same again. From the war to the moment of his death, everything remains the same. Like this, he died the second time, then the third time, the fourth time, and so on. He came to realize that the day was repeating itself. His fear of death is washed away, and the only path ahead is to become the strongest knight. Our story begins in the Empire military camp. A person wakes everyone in the morning. Our protagonist, Enkrid, is a bit annoyed by the loud noise outside. One of his subordinates is also complaining about a bug in his shoes. With all this, his distressing day has begun. Enkrid narrates that after causing a lot of trouble, he got demoted to a squad leader for a bunch of idiots. The scene shifted to the beginning of the war. Enkrid continued his narration by stating that he did not possess any special powers and that he had only reached his current level through endless training. He mentioned that on this day he met his end. He had no talent, and his dream was out of his reach. He hoped that even if everyone laughed at him and told him that his dream would never come true, as long as there was a sword in his hand, he would one day become a knight. With that, after all the struggles, a sword pierces his chest. He dropped to the ground and met a pathetic death on the battlefield. His spirit traveled towards the afterlife. He opened his eyes to see a hazy scene. He was stopped at a realm between life and death. With a loud bang, he opened his eyes once again. His subordinate beside him was still complaining about a bug in his shoes. He thought of the previous events as a dream, but everything repeated itself from the war to his death. Everything remained the same, and he died the second time. Then the third time, the fourth time, and so on. The enemy's sword piercing through his throat, the burning sensation, everything he felt was real. He realized that the day kept repeating itself, and he was stuck in it, dying again and again. It was a perfect stab. The blade's tip he had seen for the 17th time, and with that came his 17th death. Enkrid contemplates that if he had wielded his sword with just a bit more effort and had just worked a bit harder, then perhaps he wouldn't have died. Enkrid is lying in the realm between life and death. He heard an ominous voice, doubting the credibility of his contemplation. The sound of the voice revealed to be the Reaper who guides the soul to the afterlife. The Reaper told Enkrid to struggle and then give up. The Reaper stated that the despair in front of a wall could not be crossed. Enkrid was enraged at this statement. And with that, the same day began with the loud noise again. The subordinate beside him was surprised at him, waking up immediately. Enkrid told him that there was a bug in his shoes. He checked, and he was surprised to find it. Enkrid's subordinate asked if he was the one who had put the bug in his shoes. Enkrid replied that he had just seen it crawl in earlier. Enkrid thought that it was his 18th time seeing the bug. Then he exited the tent while contemplating whether he would be able to end the repeating days if he had seen it a few more times. The scene switched to Enkrid past, where he learned swordsmanship from a retired mercenary. The mercenary praised Enkrid for his swordsmanship talent and told him that he could become a knight. This is where his dream began. A knight is someone who can slay 1,000 people by himself and change the state of war by himself. An invincible hero. Enkrid thought that he was a protagonist of the song Wandering Minstrel sang. With his dream, he left his village. At the mercenary guild, some people were making fun of a newbie who got scared of a mere stray dog and had a dream of becoming a knight. Enkrid, who left his village, sat in the back, entered a mercenary corps, and learned that he was nothing special. But he was still hopeful because he believed that hard work would not betray him. If he were not talented, then he would work hard, and with time and effort he would overcome his lack of talent. He had gained experience, strength, and endurance to be acknowledged by people around him. He became stronger. He could become a knight. But that strong hope was shattered. There was a child in the village he was staying at who requested a duel. He was only 12 years old and had only started to learn swordsmanship for 6 months. Enkrid called himself a dunce who had spent over a decade wielding a sword to the point where his palms were wrecked. He was endlessly more pathetic than a genius with a 6-month experience. Enkrid, who was doubting his hard work, refused to give up. He wanted to become a knight. Everyone may belittle him, saying it's a hopeless dream, but spending less time eating and sleeping than others. He believed while endlessly swinging his sword again and again and again. Even if he can't become a knight, he could at least become an experienced soldier. 3 years later, at the present Cyprus Division, the 4 companies for platoons and below that for squads. He had become a squad commander of the so-called second-rate warriors. It was the best position he could achieve after his endless training, but at least it was better to be a soldier than a traveling mercenary. Encred called his subordinate Jackson, who was sitting alone. Jackson answered and asked why he was called. Encred told him to do his morning rotation duty today. Jackson was silent for a bit. Then he agreed and asked him to repay him for this next time. Rem, one of Encred's other subordinates, was not pleased by Jackson's wildcat-like behavior. Encred called Rem, and he replied that if he can also push something onto him as well. Encred asked Rem to teach him Heart of the Beast. Rem was surprised because Encred had previously given up on this skill because he couldn't learn it. The Nalilia versus Aspen close combat battle began. Again and again Encred died and came back to life. Although he learned Heart of the Beast from Rem each time, but he still could not watch the tip of the sword that stabbed him. But today he was confident. The soldiers were assembled, and the war started again. This is Encred's 20th time on the same battlefield. He had memorized this repeating situation. He dodged the spear that came from the back, and then next was an attack from the soldier behind him. Another squad member, Vel, would die soon. An arrow came charging at him, but Encred blocked it. Vel was about to attack from behind, but then again saved by Encred. With that, by saving Vel and killing that soldier, his first goal for today is finished. And what's left now was the person who had taken his life time after time. They both faced off. This soldier had stabbed Encred's neck 20 times. But this time, he was confident that he would survive. We see the past scenario where Rem is teaching Encred about the heart of a beast. He stated that Encred always closes his eyes in dangerous situations. He swings his axe at him, just barely stopping around his neck. Encred's eyes were closed due to fear. Rem told Encred that if he closed his eyes on the battlefield, he would die. He needs to be brave and become someone who doesn't fear death. Just like a beast. This is what is called Heart of the Beast. In the present, the soldier attacked Encred. Encred contemplated that a beast is not afraid of death. And neither is he. Death is something that makes him stronger. With all his previous efforts, he finally dodged that stab. His heart was beating fast. For the first time on his 21st try, he dodged the stab. And just before he was about to counter, he initiated a stab from behind. Right at the neck of Encred, and he died again. In the realm between life and death, the Reaper appeared again in his boat, encouraging Encred to give up all the despair and to get on the boat. He told Encred to acknowledge his weak self. Encred refused, stating that the day would never come. He was happy because he finally saw the tip of the sword and dodged it. The same day began. Rem again was surprised by his immediate awakening. Encred was moving forward one step at a time, and he resolved to challenge the 22nd time again. In the midst of the war, with soldiers fighting for their lives, Encred thought to himself that this was the 33rd time. He darted at the sword, pointing at his neck, thinking he could see it clearly. He avoided the sword, believing he'd dodge it before it reached him. Yet the soldier, with swift movements, pointed his sword at Encred again. He gritted his teeth, thinking the soldier was too fast. Unable to maintain his composure, Encred kneeled down, and with a swift attack, his blue pendant tore off and fell to the ground. He recalled a time during his days as a mercenary when he had taken a few requests to subjugate monsters. He hadn't been compelled to do so but had stumbled upon a place where he was asked for help. He decided to assist because his dream was to become a knight, and protecting the weak was a knight's duty. For killing the monsters and saving the village, a man told him that their village was poor, so all they could offer was a blue pendant. Encred had thought it was a laughable reward for risking his life. The old man, wearing a cloak and hiding his face, had told him he would grant what he desperately prayed for. Back on the battlefield, Encred lay on the ground, wondering while looking at the pendant if it could be the reason today kept repeating itself, just so he could become a knight. The soldier approached him, saying he must be in pain and offering him mercy by placing his sword to attack him. Encred tried to stand up, but his body only shivered. He looked at the soldier with glaring eyes, thinking that mercy was a joke. Watching him smirk shamelessly, Encred thought he was just a pervert who gained pleasure from stabbing people. The soldier then stabbed Encred in the back. A loud clang was heard as someone rang the bell. Inside the tent, Encred told Rem he had put an insect in his boot. Rem shouted, took the insect out of his boot, and asked if Encred had lost his mind, playing tricks right at the start of the day. But Encred walked away, telling him to stop talking and come out, stepping on the bug that came out of Rem's boot. He looked at Rem and told him to teach him the heart of the beast. With the sun out, hot and shiny, Rem jumped at Encred to attack him with an axe. Encred observed intently and managed to dodge the attack just in time. Rem gave Encred an interrogated gaze and asked what he was doing and how the skin of his heart had suddenly gotten thicker out of nowhere. Encred replied that he had trained, but Rem countered that it wasn't something that could happen so quickly. Encred thought that this had already happened more than 10 times. Rem said that there was no way his family's secret technique would be taught to another person. Encred thought it was like what he said, it was a sensation he learned from death. Encred turned back and said what was so important about that, adding that maybe he had learned it by chance. He checked some swords, took one out, and told Rem to have one more bout of sparring. Rem looked at him, smiled, and said that sounded great. Encred thought that even if he learned the heart of the beast, he would just get killed if he couldn't land a strike. Rem jumped at Encred to attack, and Encred dodged it again. Rem shouted, asking how long he was going to dodge while making a strike with his axe. Encred dodged the attack again, but barely this time. He thought that the only sword technique he possessed right now was the Valen mercenary sword technique. He gritted his teeth and thought it was an anomalous sword technique made by a mercenary known as Valen. It was a technique that a few spoke ill of and called it a petty trick. Rem laughed and told him his lower body strength was pretty weak. Encred thought that still, among what he had, it was the most decent technique. He got into position and rushed towards Rem with his sword, but Rem threw his sword away with his axe, and the sword fell to the ground. Encred looked at his hand, shivering, and recalled his death at the hands of the soldier. He recalled that for a moment there, he imitated the soldier's stab and called him a pervert. He thought that since he had been stabbed more than 10 times, his body remembered it. He drew his hand back and clenched his fist. Rem said that should have spilled some blood and added that, among what he had shown him so far, the stab just now was the most decent one, so it should go like that with some impact while showing Encred with his axe. He continued that Encred's hands should have bled and added that it was something like that doubts were too doubtful of Encred and this attack couldn't fail. Encred asked if that got blocked and what he should do next. Rem told him he should go with "he can't dodge that" and say he's dead now. That would make sure he didn't lose the grip on his sword. Encred looked at his hand and thought that, although he explained it poorly, he understood what he meant. The difference between his stab and that bastard stab was that he didn't have confidence in his sword. He remembered fighting the soldier on the battlefield and how his neck was attacked, blood spilling from it, and how he fell to the ground coughing, with the soldier pointing his sword at him, calling it mercy, and piercing his back with it. He thought he had to stab with the intent to kill. He rushed at Rem, shouting, but failed again with his sword flying up in the air. He kept remembering the soldier's words of mercy and his death, thinking of taking one step forward at a time. No, he would advance even if it was just a quarter of a step. On the 111th day, on the 123rd day, and finally on the 124th day, he shouted and jumped towards Rem, pointing his sword at him. Rem asked if he had gone crazy. Blood spilled from his hand holding the sword. Rem told him his hands were worn out with blood gushing out and asked why he was laughing like a madman. Encred laughed while keeping his sword pointed towards Rem, thinking he had mastered the perverted bastard's stab. Encred shouted, thinking he needed to move a little faster, and charged towards the soldier with pure murderous intent. The soldier also lifted his sword to attack, but Encred's blade struck the soldier's helmet with fierce intensity. The soldier counterattacked, slashing Encred's neck. As blood spilled from his wound, Encred thought that his first stab attempt had failed. Refusing to blink, he kept his eyes wide open, determined not to let go of his sword. He held it with pure resolve, thinking about everything that had happened. From each clash of swords to the recent stab, all of it was just in his head. The soldier grinned, kicked Encred's chest as he lay on the ground, and taunted him, pointing his sword and calling it mercy. Encred, with not even a slight bit of fear in his eyes, told the soldier that tomorrow he would die. The soldier laughed and stabbed Encred, piercing his chest and remarking that the dead have no tomorrow. Blood poured out, and the blue pendant shone brightly. Encred, spotting a bug, crushed it underfoot and mentioned that he had seen him heading in a while ago. Rem looked at his foot and thanked him. Encred nonchalantly told Rem to take over his guard duty and walked away, leaving him wondering why he was ordering him around so casually. On the 125th day, Encred called out to a red-haired man, addressing him as Big Eyes. The man responded affirmatively, and Encred instructed him to get shin armor, a shield, and a dagger, adding that he would pay him later, and he walked away. The man inquired about the later payment, saying he would trust Encred because he was his boss, though he didn't usually do favors for anyone. Rem asked if the squad commander had always been this pushy with commands. Jackson, sitting behind them, remarked that they always pushed tasks onto him, calling them lazy. Offended, Rem challenged Jackson, asking if he wanted to taste his axe. Another tall man appeared, wishing Rem his blessing and calling him brother. Rem thought Encred was acting weird today and saying he's unusually intense today. Encred, with a determined and sharp gaze, practiced striking a tree with his sword. He felt incredible pain every time he died and wondered if he would ever win after thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of attempts. He questioned whether he would find a way to escape and survive, whether he would sleep and wake up tomorrow, or whether he would remain stuck in this day. Realizing he was stronger than before, he knew he couldn't be content and had to surpass this challenge. He visualized the soldier who killed him standing and holding a sword. He thought he had learned how to stab and, as he practiced sword mastery, vowed not to abandon this blessing. He continued striking the tree fiercely until his sword pierced through. Encred tied his shoes, donned his armor, and resolved to keep moving forward. As the battle horns blew, he and his squad advanced. In the ensuing war, he fought, thinking that his survival was due to preparation, luck, and a cool head. On the 46th day, he got hit hard on his left shoulder by a spiked mace, but now he was quick to dodge such attacks. The next day, on the 47th, he rolled away from a swinging mace but almost got his head crushed by another enemy. Learning from this close call, he added spins to his moves to strike first. A few days later, on the 71st day, a soldier aimed low and cut off his foot, making him unable to do anything to the stabbing pervert, so he swiftly defeated him. Then, on the 89th day, he narrowly avoided an axe that could have split his head open, realizing this enemy could disrupt his fight with the stabbing pervert. Not willing to let him interfere again, he used his skill in throwing weapons to retaliate, ending the enemy's life with a well-aimed throw. Turning around, he spotted Vel right behind him, a reminder of how danger always lurked nearby. As he blocked an arrow shot by a sharpshooter called the Claw of the Hawk, Encred knew it was his turn to strike back. Facing off against the soldier he had labeled the stabbing pervert, they locked eyes with fierce determination. The soldier swung his sword aggressively, but Encred's armor protected him. Realizing he couldn't just dodge and stab, Encred charged forward, countering each attack carefully. Though the soldier was strong and nearly a prodigy, Encred adapted, using techniques from Valen mercenary swordsmanship. Shouting with determination, Encred aimed a powerful strike, which the soldier barely dodged before trying to strike back. But Encred regained control, shattering the soldier's sword in a decisive clash. As Encred prepared to finish the fight, an arrow aimed at him from behind but was swiftly blocked by Rem's axe. Encred then struck the soldier in the neck. Amid the chaos, Rem rushed forward, ready to confront the Claw of the Hawk, but Janix warned it was too late to help. With the soldier kneeling and blood on the ground, Encred stood silently, sweat dripping down his face as he looked into the soldier's eyes. With a final act of mercy, he ended the long battle by removing the soldier's head with one powerful stroke, showing his determination. Feeling victorious, Encred allowed himself a brief smile, proud of overcoming the wall after trying for so long. But his moment of relief was short-lived, as something suddenly hit him from behind. Rem rushed towards him, with Janix fighting behind him, pointing out a new enemy, the frog. Encred cried out in pain. The frog, pointing at the fallen soldier, sneered that he had invested quite a bit in raising that one, and couldn't believe someone like Encred had defeated him. The dead soldier's body knelt, his neck severed, and blood pooled on the ground. Encred gritted his teeth and glared at Frog. With a menacing sneer, Frog raised his axe and hurled it at Encred, commanding him to die. But Rem appeared out of nowhere, deflecting the axe away. He then attacked Frog with his own weapon, but Frog blocked it. They locked eyes, the air thick with tension, and continued to clash. Encred lay injured on the ground as a soldier approached, his sword drawn. Jackson then appeared and swiftly decapitated the soldier. Meanwhile, Rem and Frog kept fighting. Rem planted his hands on the ground and stood up with full force to attack, while Frog stepped back to strike. They faced each other, weapons poised, ready for the next move. Rem smiled, taunting that if Frog wanted to cut off their squad commander's head, he needed his permission first. Frog, confused, asked if that weakling was truly the squad commander and not him. Looking at Frog, Rem thought that the warrior race of frogs was born to fight, and he would either have to burn him with magic or pierce its heart in one swift strike. A daunting task. Frog looked at his hand, wondering why someone like him was on such a trivial battlefield and thinking that to kill Rem, he would have to put his life on the line. Rem kept watching him, readying himself for another attack, but Frog decided the battle wasn't worth it. They exchanged fierce gazes, and then Frog turned back and walked away. Rem called him a coward. Meanwhile, a soldier rushed at Jackson to attack, but Rem intercepted and killed him with his axe. Another one attempted to attack Jackson, but a squad member rushed in to block the assault. Soldiers kept coming, and the battle was becoming more chaotic. Other squad members also joined them as blood flowed freely. And finally, the guards began shouting to retreat, and Encred, overwhelmed, closed his eyes. Encred heard the sound of a water droplet and a voice saying he had managed to survive a day. But that was it. He opened his eyes, lying on the ground. The voice continued, saying he wouldn't be able to withstand the walls that would keep appearing in his way. The mysterious voice declared that his fate was to despair and give up. Encred thought of fate and, as he stood up, defiantly declared that for him, the walls existed to be overcome. He looked at the masked man with sharp, determined eyes. The masked man smiled, saying he eagerly awaited the moment when those eyes, filled with greed and ambition, completely lost their light. Encred opened his eyes in bed, his body covered in bandages. He looked at the ceiling and asked where he was. Someone said it was the infirmary tent. Encred looked and saw Rem sitting beside him, remarking that he had no problem sleeping for 2 days straight. He got up, and Rem reminded him that he saved him from that frog. Encred, feeling pain in his chest, questioned if it was really a frog at the end and was amazed he survived. Rem told him that his bones weren't broken, but his head was badly shaken, and asked if he remembered him, calling himself his best friend forever. Encred called him a noble hunter and turned his head away, asserting that he never said they were friends. Rem, annoyed, placed his hand over Encred's mouth, telling him to shut up. After a brief silence, he removed his hand and scolded Encred for blurting out secrets. Encred pushed Rem's hand away and questioned whether Rem was someone he had nothing to do with or his best friend, asking him to pick one. He then thought that on a new day beyond today, he had made it out alive. The red-haired man addressed Encred, calling him commander and demanding repayment threefold, asking if he knew how much he had spent to get him into the infirmary. Cries, a member of the 4th Squad, made Encred wonder why a regular soldier like him, who would usually be left to tend for himself, was in the infirmary tent. Encred lay down again and sarcastically asked Cries, who was sitting on the bed beside him, why he was nowhere to be seen during the battle. After a brief silence, Cries smiled and offered Encred a special discount, just for him, doubling the repayment. As the sun began to set, 4th Squad member Jackson entered the tent and looked at Encred. Encred asked what he wanted and told him to speak up if he had business with him. Jackson threw something towards Encred, instructing him to apply it morning and evening, twice a day, and not to ask where he got it. Encred opened the box and recognized the ointment Jackson used to use, pondering how much Jackson hated sharing his personal items. 4th Squad member Auden cried and mumbled near Encred, who told him to leave, reassuring him that he wasn't dead. As night fell, Encred wondered why they were taking shifts after all this time when they usually did whatever they wanted. He questioned if they were worried about him. In the meantime, Ragna, another 4th Squad member, entered and asked why Encred was in the infirmary, calling him commander. Munching on an apple, Ragna left as quickly as he had come. Encred closed his eyes, convinced that Ragna didn't care one bit. Besides Encred, there were 2 more soldiers in the infirmary tent. One was a platoon commander from another company who used to pick fights with him. Just like this time, the man demanded to know what Encred was looking at. Without replying, Encred thought about the other soldier, whose name he didn't know and who just stared into space. Encred surmised he was a low-ranked soldier and wondered how he ended up there. Suddenly, some noises came from outside, and all 3 of them looked up. A white-haired, big-eared lady entered the tent and asked who the commander of the 444th Squad was, and Encred gave her an interrogative gaze. The woman stood there as the platoon commander looked at her, incredulous, and muttered something about a fairy. She asked which group he was with, and he responded that his name was Vengeance and he was the commander of the 3rd platoon in the 2nd company. She remarked that his company must have taught him to state his race when meeting a superior. Apologizing, Vengeance lowered his gaze. Encred observed this exchange and realized she was the new commander of the 4th Company. Introducing himself, he told her he was Encred, commander of the 4th Squad of the 4th Company, the 4th Platoon. She acknowledged his introduction, commenting that she had heard he was leading his challenging squad members well, and she looked forward to his contributions. Turning away, she began to walk off, leaving Encred thinking that she came here just to say that. But she stopped and asked the soldier his name. The soldier, caught off guard, mumbled and finally said his name was Krang. Encred wondered if he just made that up, noting his bad attitude in front of the company commander and wondering if he was a noble. She glanced at Krang one last time and left the tent, leaving Encred to watch her in silence. As the sun set, Encred clenched his fist tightly, thinking that most of the pain was gone and he could now put strength into his body, meaning it was time to start training. As he dressed, Vengeance asked where he was going. Encred replied that he was heading to the training area. Vengeance called him an idiot for acting tough when he was the lowest-ranking soldier, while Krang watched them silently. Lifting his sword, Encred reflected on the expensive training he had undergone in his youth. He recalled the stabbing pervert's stab at the last moment, pondering what would happen if that last-ditch attack failed. He realized putting all his eggs in one basket was risky. If that one attack failed, he would die. He thought about Rem's lethal axe attacks but was interrupted by Krang's comment that he was working hard. Opening his eyes, he saw Krang sitting in front of him, pointing out that Encred's hands were twitching in the barracks, and now he was spacing out here. Encred explained that he was training his grip strength and replicating his battle. Krang asked why he was doing that, and Encred bluntly replied that he wouldn't get screwed. Krang inquired if he wanted to become something by preserving his life, making Encred reflect on his dream. A dream often mocked by others due to his lowly talent, but one he never stopped desiring to accomplish. He told Krang he wanted to become a knight. Krang looked shocked, and Encred noted it was the first time someone hadn't laughed at him for this dream. Krang stood up, saying he forgot, and suddenly remembered something he needed to do, then walked away. Encred felt strange support for the first time, and Krang smiled, telling him to remember his name as a friend if he became a knight. The next day, soldiers sat together while one shouted about the hero of the battlefield, Cypress. Inside the tent, Vengeance complained about the delayed morning ration, accusing the servers of planning to eat it all by themselves. Encred, after waking up to the wandering minstrel and waiting for breakfast, took a leisurely walk instead of heading to the training area. Jackson asked about his injuries, and Encred replied that the medicine worked well, thanking him. Jackson urged him to hurry back if he was thankful. That night, as Encred lay on his bed, he said good night to Krang, who replied in kind. Encred thought sleeping early was all he did. Vengeance called them crazy bastards, accusing them of talking nonsense. Encred closed his eyes, thinking it was a day of doing nothing. The next morning, Encred woke up to the shouts of Cypress, the hero of the battle. Sitting up, he wondered if the wandering minstrel had come again. Vengeance loudly demanded to know why the morning rations weren't there yet, accusing the servers of planning to eat them all by themselves. Encred, irritated by the repetition, suddenly thought something. He went for a walk and found Jackson, who asked about his injuries. Encred repeated that the medicine worked well and thanked him, realizing it was the same day as yesterday. Recalling a mysterious voice about another wall stopping him, he wondered if he had died without noticing. Feeling more determined, he now knew he had died, seeing the huge wall in front of him as another challenge. That night, lying in bed, Encred pondered who and how they had killed him. He considered that the enemy would have needed to get through all defenses to reach him, something only possible for knights. He wondered if a hidden assassin was the culprit, skilled in assassinations and familiar with the medical barracks. Recalling the fairy woman, he suspected she might have come to scout the location. He decided to confirm this by waiting for the assassin, planning to scream and wake the other soldiers if he saw her. Suddenly, a needle struck him in the neck. He thought, a poisonous needle? He hadn't even seen the assassin enter. He cried out in pain and fell off his bed, realizing he couldn't move or speak. This was a potent numbing poison. He wondered if this was why he died without ever knowing the reason. His thoughts shifted to the others in the tent as he looked at Vengeance, who lay unconscious with a needle in his neck. He thought about Krang and then noticed a man in a cloak standing beside his bed. It's that bastard, the assassin, he thought, and he tried to reach him. The assassin pointed his sword at Krang and stabbed him brutally in the chest. Encred was shocked and helpless. Suddenly, someone cut the tent with a sword, and Encred saw another assassin in a red cloak. He looked at the ears and the weapon in her hands and thought so it was really her, the company leader. The day repeated again, and as the morning began, the wanderer shouted, asking who the hero of the battlefield was, with the soldiers answering Cyprus. Sitting on his bed, Encred thought about the same morning occurring 3 times in a row. He recalled the assassin attack and how he had stayed alert but couldn't detect their presence. This wouldn't be easy, he realized. Plus, there was the company commander to face right after stopping the assassins. He felt a sense of helplessness, much like a few days ago during a fight with the stabbing pervert. But he remembered he had won that fight, so he'd definitely find a way. Determined, he walked out of the tent, thinking that as long as he didn't give up, he'd be fine. He removed the blanket, and Vengeance asked what was wrong with him today, saying he was acting crazy. Encred realized he had been wrong in assuming the assassins would have already infiltrated the base by then and decided to be wary of the outside. As he put his sword in its case and looked aside, Vengeance called him a crazy bastard, asking if today's training was to catch cockroaches with a sword, adding with a smirk that it was fitting for low-life soldiers. Encred turned back and told Vengeance he didn't know he cared so much about him. Vengeance, with sarcasm dripping from his voice, called him the son of a butcher. Encred looked at him and thought he was being sarcastic too. Vengeance shouted at him to screw off, saying he didn't even want to see his face. Krang came in, asking if they were arguing and if he should come back later. Encred said it was fine and invited him in. Vengeance called them annoying bastards. As he watched Krang set up his bed, Encred thought that, considering how observant the assassins were of him, Krang must be their target. He felt suspicious of Krang, wondering who he was, and decided not to dig into something his opponent wasn't willing to tell him. Unlike those crazy bastards lying and doing their stuff, pointing towards his squad members. However, since he was involved in the assassination, Encred felt it was okay to ask. He called Krang by name and asked who he was. Krang looked at him in silence for a while. Receiving no response, Encred wondered if he had phrased it wrongly. Perhaps his conversational skills were on par with Rem's. Krang finally responded, inquiring about the question and adding that it wasn't something he could tell him. Encred asked why he couldn't tell him. Krang explained that it was a long story. Encred remained silent for a while, then added that if he said so. Vengeance got offended, asking Encred if he was kidding him and saying that if he was just going to accept that kind of answer, then don't even ask in the first place, calling him a shithead. He shouted, pointing his finger, and demanded to know if Krang or Crab, whatever he was from this country, considering his manners, and asked Krang to be honest and tell him which country's spy he was. Krang looked at him in pure silence, frightening Vengeance. He then moved towards his bed and said he hadn't and wouldn't betray the kingdom. Encred looked at him, noting an aura like that of a knight in his eyes and movements. Vengeance asked if that was how he should be speaking to his higher-ups. Krang called him sir and laughed. Encred thought that Krang wasn't a knight since he was powerless against the assassin, but he was definitely hiding something. Krang wished Encred a good night. Encred wished him the same, while Vengeance only cleared his throat. Encred wondered if Vengeance was scared of Krang because of what had happened earlier, as he had been strangely calm. He then looked outside and thought that if the assassins were to barge in, they would all die. He got up and started walking away. Vengeance asked what he was doing instead of sleeping. He told him that assassins were going to invade the tent soon and asked him to cooperate if he wanted to live. Vengeance looked at him in confusion, then lay on his bed, turning away from him, and said he must have lost his mind. Krang was also sleeping soundly. Encred looked at them and thought that was the reaction he expected. Suddenly, he heard someone say how he had noticed. As he tried to see, a sword pierced through his neck, and assassins attacked from outside the tent, ripping it apart. He was shocked, thinking just when, and tried to draw his sword. The assassins also attacked Vengeance, piercing his neck, and Krang was also stabbed by them. Encred looked at them and fell to the ground, blood dripping from his neck. The day repeated, and Encred kept hearing the voice asking who was the hero of the battlefield. He sat, holding his head, thinking it was the 4th time. Since there was no evidence that the assassins were coming, he wouldn't be able to get help from Vengeance and Krang. He thought he should inform the higher-ups to get reinforcements. But as he did so, a man asked if he had gone insane and told him to screw off before he made him shut up permanently. Encred stood near the entrance of the tent, thinking maybe he could predict the moment the assassins would appear and scream right before they did. He looked outside, wondering if it was now or not. He thought perhaps now. As he shouted assassins, a sword pierced his neck. Blood flowed from his neck as the assassins entered the tent, and he cursed that they were too fast. The next night, he sat there, holding his sword, thinking there was no way to get help from others. He needed to ambush them and defeat them before they tried anything. Again, he got hit by the poison needle, and blood began to flow from his neck. He wondered how he was supposed to fight an enemy he couldn't see. The next night he stood, thinking he couldn't see them, but they could see him. An assassin appeared behind him and pushed a poison needle into his neck. He thought that as long as he couldn't avoid their poison needle, he would die without being able to do anything. The day repeated, and the next morning, again, he woke up to the shouts of who was the hero of the battlefield. He held his sword tightly, thinking it was the 20th morning, and he couldn't do anything at all. A smile appeared on his face as he thought he had only died 20 times. While walking, he thought he needed to think of a way to avoid the poison needle first and then deal with the assassins after that. He thought that he needed to find a way to avoid their attacks faster than they could see. He found Jackson cleaning something and recalled when he asked Rem why Jackson was called a perverted wildcat. Rem had said that Jackson was a dirty pervert who never tried to fight his enemies head-on and enjoyed backstabbing them and running off. Jackson called Encred, asking if his injuries were okay now. Encred looked at him, thinking he assumed Jackson would easily win against the assassins, but he couldn't just take him with him since he didn't have the authority to do so. Even if he could, that was the wall he must face by himself. He thought then he would become Jackson himself, and he asked Jackson what he would have to do to stop someone like him from stabbing him in the back. After thinking for a while, Jackson told him he wasn't sure because no one had ever survived his ambushes. Encred looked at him in shock. Jackson remained silent for a second, but then explained that Encred would need eyes on the back of his head to avoid getting killed. Encred got confused hearing this and asked what he meant by the eyes on the back of his head. Jackson thought it was the perfect time for an example and mentioned a wagon behind the tents to encircle. Encred was surprised to see that Jackson knew there was a wagon and couldn't understand how he was able to see something so far away. He questioned if Jackson really had eyes on the back of his head. Jackson told Encred that it was going to fall apart, and the wagon fell apart just a second later. Encred was shocked to see this and asked if Jackson was a prophet. Jackson thought he had spent too much time with the barbarian after hearing Encred's conclusion. Encred asked how Jackson knew, to which he explained it was sound. He heard the creaking from the wagon's axle and explained that just by observing sound, he was able to predict what was going to happen next. Encred was shocked to see Jackson hear something so quiet. Encred wasn't even aware of the wagon getting close. Jackson kept explaining how he didn't need to see to sense what was around him. If he kept trying to listen to what was around him and practice to hone his senses and isolate the sounds, he could observe his surroundings easily. Encred was grateful to Jackson for giving him such a detailed explanation and thought Jackson was too lazy in the beginning to even properly respond to him. Jackson said he was lazy, but this was better than babysitting himself. Jackson thought nowadays it felt like Encred wouldn't give up addressing him as the squad leader. During the night, while practicing to hone his senses, Encred hit the second wall in the form of faceless death. He needed to sense the assassins in order to live. He observed the surroundings using sound waves and realized regular footsteps meant it was the patrol, and he could also hear the sound of the torches. He tried to pinpoint the killer. He struggled to locate the killer, got assassinated, and failed. The next day, after waking up, he heard voices asking who's the hero of the battlefield. The voices yelled the name of Cypress. He got out of his tent and realized that even though he hadn't taken a step forward, his body remembered everything clearly, and he had learned a lot. He heard Jackson's words explaining how, just through sounds alone, he could gain a lot of information about his surroundings and could tell the location of something based on the intensity and direction of the sound. Once he could hear faraway sounds that were extremely faint, he might as well use his ears as a second pair of eyes. Jackson snapped his finger and explained that the sound waves traveled in all directions, no matter how silent they were. In such a chaos of thousands of sounds mixed together, it was needed to isolate one single wave. Encred started practicing and could hear the people chatter about stuff like a new beauty in town and someone talking about why they took another person's neck. Encred questioned what sounds were mixed among the entangled sound waves and tired of focusing more on categorizing and isolating them. He tried to observe the flags and counted them from 7 to 10. He heard the people marching and felt the waves of wind. He observed all the familiar and unfamiliar sounds but got disturbed by Krang, who addressed Encred as NC and asked what kind of training he was doing. Encred got annoyed by the nickname, and Krang asked if he was okay with it. Encred said it wasn't okay, but he didn't care either way. Encred told Krang that he was just sitting like an idiot, and it didn't look like he was training. Krang said Encred wasn't an idiot who wasted time. At night, while observing, Encred realized the faceless assassin was trying to kill him but got hit in the neck before that, and the assassin killed Krang as well. Encred felt hopeless as Krang died, and he realized it was his 33rd failure. He tried once more and kept failing and failing. He realized he didn't need more experience or divine intervention. There was no sudden realization either. He just needed to repeatedly do what he needed to do. Encred opened his eyes as he sensed someone. It was Krang, who was surprised because he thought he snuck up on Encred but still got caught. Krang realized he was training for perception since his eyes were closed for a while. Krang said Encred wasn't an idiot who wasted time. At night, Encred's eyes widened as he realized the assassin and dodged the attack. He pulled out his sword and quickly pushed the assassin back. Encred, with a crazy look on his face, he realized he had succeeded. He was no longer going to experience a faceless death. The assassin got mad and rushed forward to attack Encred. Encred realized he wasn't as good as the stabbing pervert and thought he could handle this assassin. Encred realized vengeance was already stabbed in the throat while Krang got up anxiously. He focused on the assassin since he was still experienced and could kill Encred. The assassin threw a knife towards Encred, which he barely dodged. Encred saw the ferry company commander enter the tent and jumped in to stab first to avoid death. The assassin addressed the ferry commander as a guard and threw sharp objects towards Krang, trying to kill him. Krang, in complete confusion, froze in fear, and the ferry commander jumped towards Krang, trying to protect him from the sharp objects. Encred realized she wasn't with the assassin and came to protect them. He didn't care about this and rushed forward to not lose his chance to kill the assassin. The assassin used his knife to defend himself from Encred's attack and quickly ran away to save his life. Krang realized the assassin was here for him. Encred knew, which shocked Krang, and he questioned Encred. Encred explained that no one would pay for an assassin to kill a boot like him out of vengeance. The ferry commander praised Encred for his speed. Encred realized she was an ally until now and won't let anything be known or leave witnesses. Encred remained silent for a while, and Krang asked the ferry commander a favor. He didn't want anyone to die. The ferry commander bows and understands his command. It included the platoon commander's vengeance too, who wasn't dead yet. The ferry commander assured me that they had the antidote, so he would be fine even after getting stabbed in the neck with poison. Encred realized she knew about antidotes as well. Krang thought they needed to clean up the mess that the assassin left behind so people could not find out about it. I thought it would be fine as long as no traces were left. Krang tried to find an easy way and set the whole tent on fire. Everyone rushed towards the medical tent, worrying about the fire. Encred and Vengeance survived, and Encred thought that with the fire, all the traces would get burned. So there was nothing to worry about and the people would take care of the aftermath. During the night, while walking through a jungle, the commander fairy told Krang that he would have been dead without the squad leader. She asked if he changed his mind because of Encred. He said she was right and he thought Encred was interesting. He had been trying to avoid people, but Encred rubbed one off on him. He smiled as he thought about Encred. Krang decided they'd meet again, but in their representative roles next time. Encred saw the curse fade away, cautioning him that he would see him again. Encred looked ready for it. The next day, Encred thought he had confronted the repeating day once more. He survived the silent death, and now he can sense the presence of most things. He was worried about why he still couldn't sense the ferry commander and thought he had a lot to do when he was going to get back. Encred was happy he didn't get hurt and could return immediately. The platoon commander, with an annoyed face, asked why Encred saved him from the fire. Encred got annoyed and questioned why the platoon leader disliked Encred so much. Encred told him that he saved the Vengeance from fire because they're comrades, and he doesn't need any more reasons. Vengeance remained silent and labeled Encred as selfless because he didn't treat Encred well before and yet got saved by Encred. He asked if Encred was returning, to which Encred said he was, and Vengeance cautioned him about the trashy vibe of his squad these days. Encred asked if something had happened. Vengeance explained that there was a rumor going on about the base being cursed. Ragna called Rem an underdeveloped monkey and told him not to mess with him. Rem got annoyed, and everyone started running because the squad was fighting again. Everyone understood they were acting like animals because their squad leader, Encred, wasn't here. Rem picked up Ragna and threw him on the ground, messing up people's tents. Ragna got up and attacked Rem, but he dodged it and punched Ragna very hard. Rem was about to use his axe to destroy Ragna while everyone was saving themselves because they had weapons now. Ragna gripped his sword and was ready to split Rem in half. The people tried to find the other squad members who could stop Ragna and Rem, but no one was around. Encrit came to the base and saw them fighting. He didn't care if they were called curses. He was just happy that they were his curses. Encrit yelled at them to stop, which surprised them. They questioned him when he got back and asked how he wasn't already dead. Encrit said he didn't know how he was alive, but he would definitely go crazy if they kept this up.
To be continued. If you want to watch the next part, then like and subscribe and let me know in the comment of what recap you want to watch next.